Arjun, what is your takeaway here? What is the main thing that stands out? Burnout. Okay, yeah. Well,
so I thought about this for like what's the biggest takeaway, and we've talked before about things like how good this game feels and whatnot, and so I wanted to try to venture off the beaten path a little bit. So I grabbed something that's a little less central focus, but one of the things that I took away specifically from this session of playing in the third beta was how to operate kind of like the psychology around when you're burned out. Because what's the first thing that you want to do when you realize, oh, I'm burned out, I'm at a disadvantage now, and it's gonna hurt when I get hit? You want to clam up. You want to go on the defense. You want to put space between you and your opponent. But that's actually, I think, the worst thing that you can do. So my takeaway is that actually when you're burned out, you want to go on the offense, and it's counterintuitive at first, but when you think about what happens to you when you get burned out, your defense is what gets nerfed the most. You lose access to EX moves or overdrive moves in general, yes, and that has both offensive and defensive components. You lose access to DI, has both offensive and defensive components, but you also lose access to parry, which is wholly a pretty much a defensive thing. And you can't absorb a DI when you're close to the corner, because then it's worst case scenario with stun. And you're taking extra block stun if you're blocking, so you don't want to be blocking. And now, for those that don't know, if you move backwards or if you jump, if you're airborne, your drive gauge recovers much slower than if you're either neutral or even moving forward. It actually is, you're encouraged to go on the offense. And if you're doing attacks to your opponent while you're burned out, it blocked or not, I mean, best case scenario is you're hitting them, but if they're blocking, you're still building back gauge faster for every blocked attack your opponent takes. So really, you are encouraged. If you get burned out, you want to go for it. And I know you want to say, oh, I got to cover all the potential hits. I got to make sure that I don't get opened up. It's like, no, you're already in a disadvantaged place, and it's likely that you're going to lose because you've been burned out. Accept that and then march forward boldly and try to get some offense going. Now, when that happens, if your opponent's blocking, this game is very turns based, and turns flip over very quickly. So the best case scenario, I don't think, is to actually be landing block strings. I think the best case scenario is like chip into throws, because if you're throwing your opponent, you're getting all that time that the throw animation takes, the chunk of meter back closer to being not burned out anymore. But yeah, that was the big thing that I took away, was that when you are burned out, actually you don't want to go intuitively to a defensive mode. You want to do everything you can to march forward, put pressure on your opponent, and push through the burnout as opposed to try to wait it out.
Yeah, I love that you chose Burnout as your takeaway here, because I think that mechanic is so fascinating in an incredibly positive way. I will add something here that I do think that going in and actually landing block strings is a really good strategy to get out of Burnout. Just you don't want to go too crazy there and get too close, because then your opponent will get the advantage on you. But that was one of the things I found myself doing a lot in Burnout, was like, I'd notice that I got into it and I'd go, okay, let me go forward and let me start hitting some block strings here, because it just helps accelerate your recovery so much. But it's, again, you have to be careful with it, but it also kind of throws the opponent off as well. Because here in the early days of Street Fighter 6, everybody's expecting exactly what you described there. Oh, they're in Burnout, they're going to back up, it's my time to shine. But if you move forward and you start attacking them, they kind of go, uh-oh, what do I do here? Why is he attacking me? He's in Burnout, right? Yep. But I really love the mind games that come with this. And one of the things I started doing myself was, like, when I would notice my opponent was close to Burnout, I would put my focus on making them burn out. So that would mean just going for block strings. I didn't really care so much about actual hits. I was trying to burn them out with block strings. And then you just notice that people mentally crumble when that happens, because they don't expect that to happen, right? Like and then especially if you have them in the corner, like that's it, it's a wrap, right? But it's such a crazy back and forth with Burnout, and just kind of having the awareness of what to do and when, and all these different things. I think it's such a fascinating mechanic. And one of the things I think I was telling you, Velociraptor, the other day about was how people think that the kind of the checkmate situation of being cornered and in Burnout is a little bit intense. Like, if you have no super meter, you're basically going to get stunned, right? Yeah. Because there's no escape. But if you think about traditional stun in Street Fighter, you're getting into a state where you're completely vulnerable, and it comes from a result of being hit too much. So you're already losing, and then you get put into a state where now you're going to lose more. And it's pretty brutal if you think about it. But with Burnout, it's like, yes, that checkmate situation is rough, but you put yourself there, and you have ways to manage around that, and you can also go on the offensive and try to get out of it. So it's kind of balanced that way, I think. But it's just fascinating. I really do love Burnout, so I was really excited to talk about it. So yeah.
It's just no matter what component of the game we bring up, it seems to almost immediately incite a theory fighter like trail of like, and then this could happen, but when this happens, you could do this, and like that's what this game drives at. It's such a good look for the game, especially at this early stage. What were you saying, John?
Well, you play Jamie, who doesn't have access to a fireball and much defensive tools from further out. So when I was burning myself out sometimes with Guile, I would actually back up, and it's like, okay, well, my core Sonic Boom and defensive game is so good. You have to work so hard that I'm just sitting there rebuilding up my drive gauge again, even when I'm burned out. And so I think certain characters like a Honda, Dalsum, Guile, of course, as I just mentioned, they can still stay on the defensive and be okay. But I do agree with you guys that the unexpected offense would really throw people off, especially again with, you guys know how I like to play it, just walk up and throw you a bunch. It's that could be hard to deal with if you're not expecting it. And so it's people that the mental pressure of seeing your opponent burned out and going, I better capitalize on this, can really get to people, and it's something you can take advantage of.
They become predictable. Yeah.
And I really do like that kind of the mental game of that as well. Like once you get your opponent into burnout, that like smelling the blood in the water, right? And you feel that shift. Like both you and the opponent feel it. Like you start going in more because you know they're more defenseless, right? You start trying to push them to the corner. And once they're cornered, it's like, oh my God, like that tense feeling of like, when is that drive impact coming? Am I ready to counter with a super, or like what's going to happen here kind of thing? But it's like, it kind of does feel like the way that the game shifts in Street Fighter V when V-Trigger comes into play, right? Or like before V-Trigger is activated. It's like, the activation is coming. The big button that's going to get blocked and get activated into V-Trigger, that's coming. And you kind of feel this mental shift. You feel like both players feel it, right? It's like, uh-oh, like now I have to play around this, right? It's a similar feeling in Burnout, but again, there's a lot more factors to it and a lot more ways to mitigate stuff and everything. So I really do enjoy kind of that meta game of it.
I think you're getting to a bigger point that the mental game at any given point in a Street Fighter 6 round becomes somewhat conspicuous. Like you can tell what the players are thinking and what they're going for. Someone might be in very clear footsies trying to get a whiff punish kind of a gear, and someone might be very much in I'm going to back up and try to get some space for, to set up my stuff, or I just want to get in there and rush down, or I'm fishing for a drive impact, or I'm testing my opponent to see what their reactions are like. But that becomes conspicuous, and it's something that, especially as a participant in the match, you can then use, and in real time, and like that conspicuousness and that show of intent is, I think, an incredibly important factor, not only in the gameplay, but also in the esports audience side of things, where seeing what the players are thinking and that being communicated through their actions on screen is very interesting. And at the level and the level of resolution that Street Fighter 6 shows that, chef's kiss. What a fun clip that was. And look, another similar one where we talk about whether or not the newcomers in Street Fighter 6 is the best batch of new characters the franchise has ever seen. Oh, and a link to our entire discussion where we give all of our takeaways after playing over 100 hours of Street Fighter 6. Neat.